Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my neighbor Karen hated us from the moment we moved in. She repeatedly called the police on us, trying to get us deported. She then tried to get my kids arrested for using a public trampoline. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. The first one starts like this. After moving out of Mexico, I expected we may get some odd looks or whispers in the street occasionally, but one neighbor made it her personal mission to offend us. No act was too low or too petty for this Karen, and she made our lives in this wonderful new neighborhood absolute hell from day one. But while I may be used to such behavior and can put up with it, I would not expect my children to suffer through this in what is supposedly a changed world. My children, Anita, female 6, and Miguel, male 6, who are important to address for later points in this dilemma. It all started about a week after we moved in, when the town held a craft fair in the community center. It was only a small event, but we wanted to get involved in local events, so we decided to go as a family. It would also be our first chance to introduce ourselves to our new neighbors, so it's fair to say that I was pretty nervous because I heard first impressions in small towns like this really mattered. It was only a 5-minute walk, but the weather was forecast with grey skies and showers, so we drove over in the minivan. When I noticed how warm and bright the center inside was, I left my anxieties and greeted the task ahead, moving from stall to stall across the hall to introduce ourselves. Much to my pleasant surprise, many were happy to see us, some even knowing about us already, either from some curiosity on our moving day or from rumors spread like wildfire. One neighbor in particular, however, was a little strange. They were kind to start with and when trying to offer their range of cupcakes for sale, but when I introduced us as new residents, she twisted into a poorly concealed scowl. My daughter Anita picked up a bedazzled pink cupcake knowing I would buy it for her, but was instead barked at by the owner, telling her to keep her dirty mitts off. I directed my family away from the stall quickly to try and stop the oncoming flood of tears. Avoiding her the rest of the afternoon, we were consoled by others who witnessed the ordeal, giving us a warning to stay away from who they called just Karen. She was apparently quite well known for this sort of behavior, though no one challenged her about it because I quote, "Getting on her bad side can be a real crap show." Great. It would be 2 weeks of peace before we saw her next. We had completely forgotten about the exchange, but she was clearly not someone to let things go so easily. I was trimming the hedges in the front yard while my children played nearby. It was a beautiful day, so I wanted to make the most of it, you see. "What do you think you're doing?" I heard in an accusatory tone from the sidewalk. The sharpness of it made me jump with surprise. Getting up, I saw a heavy-set middle-aged woman sporting dark sunglasses and a white straw hat. Realizing too late that it was Karen, I explained to her that I was gardening, which only earned me a sarcastic remark for my efforts. Directing me to the other side of the hedge, I saw a small pile of leaves and twigs that had fallen onto the sidewalk. This was what she was getting worked up about. "This is public property. Next time you litter on it, there will be trouble, understand, little man?" she said, sneering down at me over her sunglasses. I nodded jovially, agreed to clean it up later. I suppose later was not soon enough as she stormed off in a huff after, followed by older children or vampires trying to hide from the sun under their thick hooded jerseys. A few days later, I received a letter from the HOA notifying me that I had been issued a $100 fine over the issue after an anonymous witness report. There was only one person I could think of, leaving anonymity out of the equation. So then the next day, on a walk through the neighborhood, we spotted a trampoline on the grass near the community center, which my children pestered me constantly about for permission to use it. Assured by other parents that it was free to the public, they proceeded to tire themselves out jumping around while other families came and went. Just as I began to doze off on a bench nearby, I was startled awake by the ear-splitting wail of a banshee, turning as Karen was running across the park to us. "Get them off there this instant," she demanded, and I slowly tried to calm her down, though she refused. "That's not your trampoline. Go home," she demanded again. When I tried to explain that our house was around the corner and we had permission to be here, she flat out refused to accept it. "You don't live here. Your people don't belong here. This neighborhood is for real Americans. Take your little mudballs," pointing towards my children who now stood watching the exchange, "and go back to your own country, damn it." Sick of having to take this much crap, one bad person in 100 was not gonna scare me out of my home, so I stood my ground and told her that we would not be moved. After a few minutes of interrupting her every sentence, she flipped out and walked off on her cell phone, presumably to complain to someone else. 10 minutes later, she returned cackling with 2 uniformed police officers who seemed just as confused by their presence as I was. With a crooked finger, she pointed and ordered them to arrest us as intruders to the neighborhood. No one moved though. After a hushed conversation to sell the chaos, it turns out she called under false pretense of public disturbance, which I of course denied. And much to her annoyance, but to my relief, the police left without any action, dispersing a growing crowd of onlookers. She then stormed off cursing under her breath. We had some good fortune after that, possibly put off by her public shaming. She stopped giving us grief, only now resorting to crossing the road if we were walking towards her and giving icy glares from afar. One evening at dinner, my son Miguel was quietly moving his broccoli around with a fork as his mind considered something. Asking him what it was, he asked, "Dad, why do we throw the garden weeds away?" Confused, I said that we had to because weeds were not good for the garden. "But can't we sell them like Karen?" he added. He explained that he had seen Karen in the public park by the trampoline earlier today, talking to a group of teenagers, giving them small bags. Although Karen refused to acknowledge him, he overheard that it was something about a weed. With a mixture of shock and eagerness, I told my son not to worry about it and warned him of the unsuspecting drug. The next morning I called the police, and with a helpful anonymous tip they were able to catch her in the act, later that day trying to peddle her product in the park. A further investigation revealed to us by rumor and reported news that she had established a small workshop in her basement for growing this stuff and even roping her older son into the family business as well. I was not present for the legal trial, but we found out later that she was sentenced to a few years in jail, along with her eldest who was thrown into juvie. Meanwhile, with no nearby relatives, her youngest son was taken by CPS, Child Protective Services, and was rehomed. I felt a bit bad for the kids, but Karen deserved everything she got. And here, Ripe Stars, I would say there is simply no place in any society for any entitled racist Karens. If you agree, please don't forget to leave a like on the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. And the next one is another HOA story about an HOA vandalizing the ambulance of a disabled kid that was parked in OP's driveway. People have a lot of assumptions when it comes to a parent who has a disabled child. Most of the assumptions are not good things, and it is even worse to hear them out loud. I've heard almost everything you can think of in regards to my child being disabled, people thinking that it must have been because I did something wrong at some point during my pregnancy or his young life. Or even seeming to be angry that my child simply exists in this world and I'm the one supporting and loving him. When I was pregnant, I was sick for a good portion of it, stuck on bed rest and feeling totally miserable, but not sad because I knew at the end I would get my baby boy. Oddly enough, he was fine during that entire time. I was sick from everything the doctors could tell. Then it came time to give birth and things did not go so smoothly. The cord got wrapped around him and it caused some serious and lifelong problems. My son had brain damage from the day he was born and physical problems just seemed to follow in the path. Still, he went further than any of us would have thought possible and found his own ways to communicate and live his life. Some doctors thought he would not live a week and now he is 6 years old and strong. He uses a wheelchair since he cannot walk and needs a feeding tube to eat. Going back to how people make a lot of assumptions, the one thing nobody assumes is how expensive having a child like mine can be. It's a sacrifice we make though because we love our son and would do anything for him. Insurance handles a lot of the medical stuff, but there are other things he needs that end up falling to us. I even quit my job after he was born so I could take care of him 24/7. For us, one of the more difficult things was transporting him to places. From doctors to the park, it was always a struggle, even with the van we had. We did not have a van that he could sit in his wheelchair, so we had to improvise. We would pick him up out of his chair, which was more custom-made for him, into a car chair that was not a very good solution. It could not recline his head like the other chair, which made us worry about him choking if his neck ended up falling forwards too much. He was getting too big for that and the current van was getting too old as well. Despite not having a lot of money, we knew that we had to get something else. We searched for a while before we found something that seemed like the perfect solution. I wouldn't really call it a van because while it was the same shape, the inside was very different. It was basically gutted and redone to work for somebody with special needs like my son. He could stay in his wheelchair and be hooked in. But also in the back was kind of like a cot that folded out in case he needed to be flat for transporting or something like that. I will admit that it was old and looked worse than our current van appearance-wise, and internally though it didn't have as many miles and the parts were newer and worked better. It was just the exterior that looked old, but we didn't care. It was in our price range and seemed to have everything our son needed. We could even hook him up to a feeding tube or an IV if needed, almost like our own mini ambulance special for our son. Now, I say it was in our price range, but that didn't mean that it was cheap by any means. It was about $50,000, but honestly, that was a steal. Anything else even close to that good a van would have been almost double that. Hell, even if we bought a new van and gutted it ourselves and hooked it up like an ambulance would have cost more. The HOA was not happy about the new van and contacted us right away that it went against the guidelines by being old and looking like a beat-up mess. We explained to them exactly what it was and that if it was for a health reason, the HOA guidelines did not matter. The ADA superseded it. They did not like that response and then made the worst decision in the history of their entire life. They started making comments about my son and how he should not even be living in the neighborhood. That he should be in a home somewhere or that we should have put him out of his misery years ago. My husband had to physically restrain me from attacking them. They were sending us nasty letters and threatening to have the van towed away. Also, that they were gonna call CPS on us because clearly we did something wrong to cause our son to be the way he is. I was beyond angry, and then one morning we went outside to find out that the van had been vandalized. I am not talking about spray paint or eggs being thrown at it. The windows had been smashed, the van was dented all over the place, and upon a closer look the brake cable had been cut and the engine got destroyed. Also, it was found that something was poured into the gas tank that was not gas, but something to kind of turn it into a solid mass. I forget what it was called as I typed this. Basically, it ruined that part of the van too. What they didn't know is that we have cameras both outside of our house and a van dash cam. We saw from two different angles the car being destroyed and it being the HOA people that did it. They used baseball bats and just went to town on the van. There was no way it could be seen as anything except for intentional. We were shaken up but still sued them for what they had done. Without that van and without the old one, it was nearly impossible to get my son to appointments and we had to rely on paying crazy amounts of money on an ambulance service. That is something insurance does not cover. In court, we gave the evidence of the videos that the HOA people did not know we had. They turned white like a ghost as a judge watched what they did to the van. They couldn't even come up with an excuse. There was a jury to determine how at fault they were and how much money we would get. Before that happened, the HOA lawyer wanted to make a settlement. They knew after that evidence they were gonna lose. They offered us the money we paid for the van and we declined. It was not gonna be enough and we wanted them to pay. They had to pay us $100,000 total between the van being destroyed and the ambulance service bills that piled up in the meantime. It was enough that we were able to get a similar van for my son. We had deep concerns about it being vandalized again though, not in the same way but a more subtle way where we could get into an accident after not knowing it was messed with. Therefore, we started keeping it in the garage at all times we were not using it. So in one way, we beat the HOA and got a better van out of the deal. In the other way though, they get what they wanted, which was the not great looking van to be out of the neighborhood. I just know if they say one comment about my son again, my husband won't be able to hold me back from hurting them in more than just their wallet. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it is always so sad to see people discriminating against disabled folks, which seems to happen especially often in HOA neighborhoods for some reason. Absolutely despicable. The next one is titled, "Tearing open our driveway was a terrible idea." This is not about me, but about a guy I used to work with. He was a mountain of a guy, a huge Turk, but the kindest guy I ever met. He would do anything for people he liked. Nobody ever saw anybody get on his bad side until that fateful day. As it happens, he was also our delivery driver, and he spent most days on the road in his semi, leaving before dawn and returning quite late, if at all, that day. Our warehouse had a driveway large enough for him to pull the semi into and load/unload. The supermarket next door decided to do some renovations and expand. When they started construction, they started tearing out their brick parking lot and getting close to tearing out our driveway. So my boss ran out and told them where our property line is and is assured that they won't cross onto our property. Everyone goes back inside, nobody worries, until there is suddenly a raging bear Turk standing in the break room shouting about how the driveway has been torn up and he cannot get his lorry in. We go out and indeed the driveway is half missing and there is a concrete building foundation poured in. Construction workers are nowhere in sight, boss sends the supermarket manager an email message and everybody goes home. Next day we arrive to the site of very angry construction workers. Apparently the delivery driver went back in the middle of the night with some bolt cutters, liberated about 30 of their shopping carts and stuck them into the drying concrete in various comical positions. Overnight, the concrete hardened and the carts became quite difficult to remove. Construction crew brings in the jackhammers and 4 days later, most of the concrete is gone and they start preparing for another pour. This time leaving our driveway intact. Foundation comes out fine, everything is looking good. At that time, my boss shows up with the announcement that he had a survey done and while they did not tear open our driveway the second time, they were still closer to our property line than allowed and he had already filed a complaint to get the concrete removed. It took them another week of jackhammering to get it out. The next one is titled, "Don't Steal Deposits." So, this story takes place like 5 years ago when my husband and I were broke college students with a young baby. We worked hard to afford our crappy little duplex, $600 a month and necessities, while trying to finish our degrees to one day get ahead. Our duplex was one in an entire neighborhood owned by a large company and managed by a super sketchy married couple who lived on the same street. Before our kid was born, we did the normal excited new parent thing of painting his nursery and decorating. Our lease stated that we needed permission to paint, which we obtained from the property manager, the husband of the couple. He insisted it would be fine and being young and naive, we did not get it in writing because he was so chill about it. So we paint and move on with our lives. A little while later our lease was up and we had given notice to vacate as we were moving closer to my husband's school. The property manager was understanding, everything was fine and we scheduled our move-out inspection. Prior to this inspection, we specifically asked him for the name of the paint color we needed to use when repainting the nursery. He flat out refused to give it, saying it was unnecessary to paint as we had been there so long they would be painting the whole duplex anyway. Okay, cool. Move-out inspection day comes and goes. We left the house in better shape than we found it. Aside from a small area of torn carpet right along a seam in a doorway, the property manager inspected and said everything looked great. And we should get our whole deposit, $400 back minus a few bucks for the torn carpet. Sounds good, boss. Enter a period of a few weeks where we waited and waited for our deposit, eventually leaving messages upon messages with false promises or no return calls at all. Eventually, over a month later, this culminated in a phone call with the property manager where he said, and I remember this almost verbatim, "I don't know what you're so worried about anyway. It's only like $200 you're getting back." He cited the painted nursery and the huge mess left behind as deductions, and I coldly informed him we would be going to court then because we did not feel like we owed for those reasons. The place was actually spotless when we left, aside from the 6-pack of beer we left him in the fridge for being chill. Not 1 hour later he called back and miraculously our refund check had just shown up in the mail. Already knowing he was trying to F us, we installed a recording app on my phone, one-party consent state, and went to the office. The check indeed was only for $200 of our deposit and included no list of what they charged us for, which is an important detail. We intentionally goaded him into admitting that he had told us not to paint and that the house looked great on move out, and went on our happy way, revenge plan already unfolding. We did not cash the check and instead emailed the CEO of the entire property company, copying in the property manager and detailing the entire process. The CEO sent back a smartass email with a cute little typed up list of deductions, including all the things we were specifically told we would not be on the hook for. A fun detail was that even by his own math, they owed us $230 of our deposit. No one really had an answer for why they then tried to issue a check for $200, but whatever. The joke was on him, because we began digging through all the state regulations on security deposits and refunds, hoping to prove that our length of stay meant he could not charge us for wear and tear things like carpet cleaning. And in our search, we instead stumbled upon a statute requiring landlords to return security deposit refunds and an itemized list of deductions within 30 days, or lose the right to withhold for actual damages and be subject to treble damages if the landlord is thought to be maliciously withholding the refund. So we typed up a demand letter for our entire security deposit, citing the statute, which he had broken because we didn't receive any refund offer or itemized list until 6 weekends later, and when he sent a smartass reply, we filed in small claims court for our entire deposit, plus treble damages and court costs. Now, I don't know if it is clear at this point, but I can be really effing petty if I feel like someone is trying to F with me. And it was clear this guy made a career out of stealing money from low-income renters who likely could never afford to fight it. I was pissed. I spent the next month before our court date compiling all email correspondence in which he had effed himself over numerous times by providing written documentation that he exceeded time limits, charged incorrect amounts, etc. I also compiled phone records showing dozens upon dozens of unanswered and unreturned calls to the property manager, and detailed accounts I had made immediately after hanging up of lies from the property manager. I printed out a screenshot from the company's own website detailing the CEO's role as the legal advisor, so I could innocently claim, shouldn't he have known the statutes for these issues? I printed all the relevant statutes and highlighted the important parts. And then I made 3 copies of everything and nicely compiled each in a binder, complete with sleeve protectors and page numbers. One for our own reference and one for the a-hole property manager and or CEO, we were not sure who would show up, and one for the judge himself. We also took our handy little recording of the property manager admitting to all the stuff he lied about and then pretended to have never said it. Needless to say, the judge laughed at how prepared we were and asked if we were law students, and then awarded us treble damages and court fees as well as interest. I will never forget the CEO's face when we looked over and smiled at him. All his a-hole emails and disregard for the law were on the table, and rather than giving us the original $350 or so we were promised from our deposit, he ended up paying us over $1,300 a month later. It was absolutely glorious. By the way, edit, I completely forgot until my husband and I were just laughing hysterically about this, but the CEO also filed his response to our suit with a counterclaim for $1,225 for expenses incurred as a result of the actions of plaintiff. He never really said how he got to that number, but in his last email before we sued, he did say, "I hope we can avoid litigation in this matter, but we will engage aggressively if forced to do so." And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.